Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this extraordinary meeting of the minds of three notable child benefit research scholars. I am Charles Lewis Jr., the director of the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy. I will serve as the host for today's discussion on how the United States support the development of its children. The recent publication of Jane Waldfogel's book, Child Benefits, A Smart Investment for America's Future, sparked the idea to bring these accomplished research scholars together. They have contributed immensely to the field of child benefit policies over the decades. There's a link in the chat with a code that provides a 25% discount on the purchase of the book. Please do yourself a favor and get this book because there's a lot of great information. And I met Jane during my doctoral studies at Columbia University School of Social Work, and I was inspired by her work ethic. I remember whenever I walked past her office, she was always at her computer intensely writing. I said, wow. Now, Garfinkel was my dissertation chair. And I remember older students kept telling me what a taskmaster he was. And he was, but it was really good for me. He helped me gain a lot of knowledge. And then I met Michael while I was on Capitol Hill, and we've been working to try to get the federal government to introduce a bill on for child development accounts. I want to thank all of our co-sponsors who helped us spread the word about this critical policy discussion through a social work lens. The United States has one of the highest child poverty rates among wealthy countries. It stands out among its peers as the only country that does not offer a child benefit, which are regular payments from the government to most or all families with children, regardless of their employment status. The U.S. system of supporting children has leaned more towards crisis intervention than proactive child development. Thus, we have the Child Protection Services as one of our leading agencies. The focus has swung between child safety and family preservation. Policymakers have had to navigate a structural maze defined by federalism, a complex web of entitlements, block grants, and discretionary programs. In addition to economic insecurity, too many children and families face numerous challenges to their health development. Families struggle to find adequate resources to meet the health and mental health needs of children and to provide quality education and childcare. Today, we will talk about the government's role in supporting children and families. Our speakers have worked on child benefit policies inside and outside the United States. They will share what they have learned over the years. As Jane stated in her book that there's reason for optimism, she found that there are proposals on both sides of the aisle for universal or near universal child benefits. She says there is a consensus for putting more money in the hands of parents to support children. We saw a glimpse of this during the recent reauthorization of Title 4B of the Social Security Act, which primarily funds child welfare services. H.R. 9076, the Supporting America's Children and Families Act, passed unanimously out of the Ways and Means Committee. How many times did that happen? It passed the House by a vote of 405 to 10, and it passed the Senate by unanimous consent. So that's true bipartisanship. It's overwhelming. Both parties seem to agree on the importance of developing America's children. It's a matter of finding policy we can agree on. And so I would now like to bring to you the Council on Social Work Education President and CEO, Dr. Halaevalu Vakalahi, to bring us greetings on behalf of our sponsors.
Thank you, Charles. Malolele and aloha. I'm Halaevalu Vakalahi, President and CEO of the Council on Social Work Education, as Charles has indicated. I would like to acknowledge this indigenous land and the peoples who nurture this land for our benefits today. As Charles indicated, we're deeply grateful for the extraordinary panel of experts today, and these are giants whose shoulders we all stand. You know, despite uncertainties, these times are also filled with possibilities, as we have already heard. And the question of what does America owe its children, and are we meeting that obligation, is certainly provocative, and in all levels. Whatever our answer may be to this question, we all have roles, including the stewardship of excellence and innovation in social work education, ensuring that we are preparing social workers who continue to be 100% essential in the future. You know, I take the privilege also to give a shout out to our 960 plus social work programs, including the Brown School, the main sponsor of this event, in 50 states, 3 territories, and a district, all champions for all of our children, their families, and communities. But today's conversation is an opportunity for all of us to collectively reflect on the social contract we've made with each other, to make decisions based on core principles, including respect for the dignity and worth of the person, and in this case, the dignity and worth of all of our children, which our extraordinary panel of experts are going to be leading today. So today I'm also reminded of the International Indigenous Voices in Social Work Conference held last month in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, that centered on the theme, One Child, Every Child, which solidified the necessity of investment of time, talent, and treasure in the process, in the success of one child, every child, for a better future. That is the message of today's event. And I'm so excited, so excited to hear our expert panel talk about the possibilities of these times, despite the fact that there's so much uncertainties. Thank you again for the opportunity to bring greetings, and we are so looking forward to the fantastic session today. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Dr. Vakalahi. So I will, before we get started, we want please type any questions you may have in the chat, and we will select questions following our panel discussion. So I will briefly introduce our panelists. There's a link in the chat to the landing page with expanded bios. So they will tell you more about their work during their opening statements, and I will introduce them in the order that they will speak. Jane Waldfogel is the Compton Foundation Centennial Professor for the Prevention of Children's and Youth Problems at Columbia University School of Social Work and visiting professor at the Center for Analysis of Social Exclusion at the London School of Economics, and of course, the author of the book that I mentioned. Michael Sherraden is the George Warren Brown Distinguished University Professor at Washington University in St. Louis and co-director and founder of the Center for Social Development. He is a leading proponent of child development accounts. Irwin Garfinkel is the Mitchell I. Ginsburg Professor Emeritus of Contemporary Urban Problems at the Columbia University School of Social Work. He is the co-founding director of the Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy. Please welcome our guests. So, Jane, why child benefits? How did you get started, and what are you doing now?
So thank you, Charles, for organizing this session. It's really a pleasure to be here. How did I get started on child benefits? I mean, I think all of us have always been interested in child benefits, and we've always noted the fact that you pointed out at the start that the United States is the only wealthy country without a universal or near universal child benefit. And I think for many of us, we kind of said, well, that's just one of the many peculiarities of the American social welfare system. But several years ago, I think a number of us started thinking, is that really the case? And should we really just be giving up on this? And a number of us started writing about whether we called it child benefit or universal child allowance. We started, agitating for reconsidering this kind of policy. And at the same time, the United States was sort of slowly but surely building this new benefit called the child tax credit, which started to become more and more expansive. And there were then proposals to turn this thing into a child benefit. And these are proposals on both sides of the aisle. So it seemed to me like a really opportune time to put together the evidence on what we know about child benefits and have that be available for policymakers. I have to say, I'm just always an optimist. I continue to believe in evidence-based policy. And I just believe that if the evidence is there, at some point it will be useful in the policy process. There's a policy process. We need to have political will and all of that, but we also do need the evidence. And so I saw it as my job. What I could do is pull together the evidence. So that's what I've been working on. That's what's in the book. So in the book, I review every study I could find on the effect of child benefits from the wealthy countries, the 38 members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, so really our peer countries, and all the evidence on child benefits or similar programs in the United States, and especially from the 2021 expansion that we had, where we briefly, for 6 months, turned the child tax credit into a monthly universal child benefit. So we have a lot of evidence now, and it seemed like a really opportune time to review it. So I looked at 5 big questions that policymakers are interested in. And first was, how do families spend the money? I mean, are they frittering away these benefits on, alcohol, drugs, tobacco? And the evidence is super clear. Families spend the money on items for children, clothing, books, toys, childcare, activities for children, and they spend the money on necessities for families, food, housing, transportation, utility bills. The second big question, especially in the United States, is if we have these benefits, will families have more children just to get the money? Will there be an effect on fertility? And so I have a whole chapter on fertility in the book. And, the history of these kinds of benefits is it's really hard to move fertility. And it's the same is true of these benefits. And so no, these benefits really don't have much impact on fertility. The only exception is some countries have these large birth grants where when you first have a new baby, they give you like a big lump sum of money, like $3,000 or 5,000 euros. Those benefits do affect fertility and do lead to slightly more births. Third, in the United States especially, people want to know, if you have these kind of programs, are parents going to stop working? Or are they going to cut back on work? And that's been a big concern, partly because of confusion about, are these programs welfare, which they're not. Fortunately, the evidence also is very clear that there's little or no effect on fertility, and I can go into, on employment, and I can go into more detail later if people want to hear more about that. But the bottom line is that there are not big effects on parents' employment. Fourth, of course, you want to know is, do these policies reduce poverty and reduce hardship for families? And again, the evidence is very clear, probably clearest from the 2021 expansion. As you said, Charles, we have the highest child poverty rate, or one of the highest in rich countries. When we rolled out the expansion of the child tax credit for those 6 months and delivered those benefits to almost all families with children, our poverty rate fell in half to the level of countries like Denmark and Finland. We've never had a child poverty rate that looks like Denmark and Finland. And, unfortunately, the other piece of evidence is when we ended that expansion, the child poverty rate doubled again. So it's a terrible data point, but it sort of brings home the point. And then finally, the fifth question would be, what about benefits for children and families? The theory of change would be you reduce poverty and hardship and financial strain. You give parents more control over money they can spend on items for children and necessities. Hopefully, it's going to have beneficial effects, not just in the short run, but in the long term for kids. And there the evidence is very persuasive as well. And, if you add all of this up, Irv Garfinkel and others at Columbia have done cost benefit analyses. And if there's a huge return on investment. So for every dollar that we spend on these programs, we get at least $10 back in return because of these long run benefits. So, we'll talk later about the current moment and, what happened in the Trump bill last year and why there wasn't a larger expansion. But I'm still optimistic that at some point we're going to expand the child tax credit and turn it into a universal child benefit. And it's just a question of when that will come about. But I think have I already used up my time? I suspect I have. So
No, you have a few more minutes if you
have a few more minutes. Okay, well then briefly, the story is Congress last summer had they faced two questions about the child tax credit to make it more generous and to whether to extend it to more families with children. There actually was a lot of support among both Republicans and Democrats to make the policy more generous. J.D. Vance, for example, proposed raising it to, I think, 4,800, 5,000 a year from its current 2,000. And J.D. Vance said it really should go to all families with children. Unfortunately, that's not the position that Trump took in his legislation. And so the benefit was raised from 2,000 to 2,200 a year. And unfortunately, it continues to exclude the lowest income children. So about the bottom 1 in 4 children in the United States either don't receive any child tax credit or they receive only a partial credit. And the reason for that is that their families don't have earnings high enough to qualify for the full credit. So really perversely, the families that we exclude from this child tax credit are the 25% lowest income children. Following the legislative changes last summer, that's now gone up to about 28% of children are excluded because some immigrant children, in addition, have been excluded, as well as more low-income children. So, and to come back to your original point, Charles, that is in sharp contrast to what other countries do. If they exclude families, they exclude the highest income families who have the least need for the program and who would benefit the least. But there's no wealthy country that excludes the lowest income children. And of course, there's no reason to do that. So let's be serious. We have work to do to persuade Congress to do this. But there is support in both parties. Yes, admittedly, much more support in the Democratic side than in the Republican side. But even on the Republican side, there is support for putting more money in the hands of parents, including low-income parents, and letting them do what they need to do for their children. So I do think we'll get there, but it's going to take some more work.
Thank you. And Michael.
Thank you, Charles, and thanks, Chris, and thanks, Jane, for your excellent book that brought us here together and spurred this discussion. And thanks to the CSD team for producing the event. I want to say that I'm honored, and it's a real pleasure to be on this panel with two outstanding social policy scholars. I've admired their work throughout my whole career, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with them today. And thanks to all the co-sponsors. Let me start with a kind of big picture view, because it might be helpful in sorting things out. In a very big picture, the way benefits are provided the state can provide them directly as public goods or as specific services, and that's not the topic we're talking about today. Although I would say that over time, the long story over time is that more and more things become public goods, and that's really a good thing. And hopefully people's lives can be improved by that trend. Then turning from provision of goods and services to financial support could also be divided into providing money for income, regular income, or as we've been working on, providing money to build assets over time. And these are slightly different, but both are necessary, I think. But for low-income people, we've not really focused on building assets over time. We do have lots of policies for building assets for people who are not poor, operating primarily through the tax system. But most low-income people don't benefit from that. So this is the kind of lay of the land for the discussion today, and so I think providing income or providing assets can all qualify as a child benefit, although we use slightly different language to talk about that. The child benefits as assets really takes a more a perspective of money accumulating to make lifelong investments. So money for education, for job training, money that may go into a house when people are adults, or other investments across life that it really thinking about social policy, not just as consumption support, but as building a life. And really that's not quite a fair statement, because I totally believe in all of the income supports that Jane just talked about, and more, and Irv will talk about income supports, I believe. These are all really necessary. So it's not an either or choice. It's just that households need both. They need to think about short-term consumption. They also need to think about longer-term investments that can enable them to improve their life. For the lowest income people, for example, can enough money be accumulated so they could, if they need to, move to a different neighborhood where a school might be a little better. So it's not just rich people that need to accumulate assets. All of us do. So this is a vision about asset building policy that includes everyone, with greater support at the bottom, the least disadvantaged, and it lasts across life. This is not something that we have much experience with in the United States, or really anywhere. But recently, in the last few decades, we've been making a little more progress. CSD at Center for Social Development, we are systematically testing child development accounts, which are universal accounts at birth, that are then build assets over time for the first investment starting post-secondary education. So we have an experiment in Oklahoma. We chose Oklahoma because we needed large subsamples of African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanics, who those groups, because they accumulate very much lower levels of assets than the white population. So we needed a state that had those populations, and also had a pretty good state college savings plan that we could use, because we're using it as a platform. So we've adapted the state college savings plan, which usually serves about 6% of children in the United States. But in our adaptation in Oklahoma, the college savings plan is serving 100% of births for our sample population. So we're testing a universal idea through that sampling strategy. So it's experimental design, so we have very rigorous research evidence. It has been a very productive project. It's now in its 18th year. The newborns are going to be going to college this year and next year, or whatever they do for post-secondary activity, and we'll be able to see effects on their well-being. I have to say that there's a large body of generally positive results on, first, that the treatment kids accumulate more assets, and there are interesting and positive results on aspects of outlook of the parents, depressive symptoms of the parents, parenting practices. Kids have a little better social emotional development. So there's also non-financial effects that are occurring. And I'd also point out that all of these effects that we're measuring so far are occurring before the family has spent the money. So there's something about asset accumulation that seems to affect how people look at the world. And maybe, I don't want to overstate these effects, but the effect sizes are meaningful. They're not trivial. But it's something about how these effects, give people a little better outlook, give them a little more hope, and it shows up in their behaviors and in their sense about the future. So because of this evidence, we've been able to do policy innovations in several U.S. states. There are several states that now open accounts for every newborn. We're also worked in a number of other countries. Not time to talk about that here today, but there are other countries that are working on this idea. And in general, I'd say we have a kind of start. I really don't want to overstate this. It's really a small part of social policy, especially compared to the income supports. But the start is interesting. And I would also say there's a number of local projects that are doing child development accounts or something like that. People use different names for this idea. And the local programs are also interesting, but we've tended to focus on larger scale projects because we're interested in a policy structure. We're interested in an institutional structure that can be put in place that is efficient and sustainable over time and can reach everyone. None of the local projects reaches every kid. So maybe, I mean, this is just a strongly institutional view and not a behavioral view. Trying to put in place something that makes life a little bit better for people, all the people, and maybe for the nation. We have evidence from, as I said, CEDOK, that the treatment kids do much better than the control kids on all kinds of outcomes. I'm pleased to say, for example, that 99.9% of the treatment kids are still in the program 18 years later. Only one family opted out in the beginning. And they have all accumulated assets and are now in a position to use those assets to apply to the next step of their life. It's kind of startling statistic, actually, but it says a lot about policy structure. If you put a policy structure in place that'll do that, then people are able to do it. I think about this a lot. This might sound like extravagant thing to do for all kids, but it's not that different from. I really got this idea when I started as a young professor, and I had a retirement account at work, and assets started to accumulate, and I hadn't really thought that much about it. And we had educational debt, young kids. I didn't think about this idea, but money started to accumulate, and then I started to think about it. And actually, this is a theoretical point, which is that if the general economic understanding is that if people think and behave differently, they can accumulate assets. And we're making the theoretical point that if assets accumulate, people will think and behave differently. Both of these things are to some extent true, but in economics, this hasn't been a prominent idea, and certainly in social policy, it hasn't been a prominent idea. So that's where things stand. There is a current recent development. The president, a Republican, a kind of peculiar Republican, adopted what he's calling Trump accounts. And so he has said he's going to open accounts. In fact, they've enacted as part of the big, beautiful bill legislation to open accounts that possibly will cover all kids. But we're in design discussions with the U.S. Treasury Department now about how they're going to do that and whether they intend to do that. So it's still, I have to say, an open question, but we're working with that as constructively as possible. The good things about the Trump account proposal is that maybe we can get to a structure that would include all kids. If so, then I think it's a policy structure we can do more with over time. It's by its nature now a very bipartisan discussion because the Republicans have proposed it and Democrats also tend to support. And they put $17 billion on the table to start this policy. So $17 billion is not that easy to come by. Even in a world where people talk about trillions, $17 billion, you can do a lot. So it might be a good start. And I say might be a good start on a policy coming out of a piece of legislation that I think we would all agree is some of the worst legislation that Congress has enacted.
It is.
Yeah.
Certainly is.
So I probably have talked long enough. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. Irv?
Charles, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the panel. I also thank the sponsors for sponsoring the panel. I love Jane's book, and I greatly admire Michael's work. My talk today focuses on my research on the benefits and costs of a child allowance, or in Jane's terms, a child benefit in the United States. Adoption of this child benefit is the central recommendation of Jane's book. In 2020, a group of us at Columbia began a benefit cost analysis of converting the $2,000 per child tax credit in the federal income tax into a child allowance by making it fully refundable and by increasing benefits to $3,600 per child under age 6 and $3,000 per child 6 to 17. In late 2022, we published our analysis in the Journal of Benefit Cost Analysis. And in my talk today, I describe what we did and what we found. The analysis measures short and long-term economic benefits and costs to program beneficiaries, taxpayers, and society as a whole. Only benefits and costs that can be valued in dollar terms. So, for example, fertility and the effects on work and on poverty are really important, but you can't so far attach dollar values to those. We began with a review of the literature of the impacts of cash and near cash benefits on children and their parents. We selected only studies that were based on natural experiments, or in 2 cases, random assignment experiments. Natural experiments are based on real programs. The staggered rollout of this food stamp program is an example of a natural experiment. The program began in 1964 in a few counties in the country. Every year, additional counties enacted food stamp programs. And in 1972, federal legislation required all counties to adopt the program by 1974. The staggered rollout of the program created a natural experiment in which census data is used to compare children who were born before food stamps existed in their county to children born after the program began. Children in each county are compared to each other and to children from all other counties before and after food stamps began in their county. This is a remarkable before, after, and cross-county design. 6 of the 20 studies we found on child outcomes are based on this natural experiment. Our benefit cost study builds on the shoulders of these research pioneers. Of the 20 studies, all but one found positive effect on child and parent outcomes. Cash and near cash benefits decreased neonatal mortality, increased children's health in childhood and adulthood, and increased life expectancy. Benefits also increased children's educational attainment and earnings, and decrease crimes and involvement in the criminal justice system. The benefits also increase mothers' health. We standardize these impacts to measure the impact per $1,000 of benefits. We then use the economic literature to value the impacts on health and crime. Criminal justice costs such as police, judges, and prisons are relatively easy to measure, but measuring the dollar value to the victim of crime is a huge undertaking. For example, obviously the costs vary by crime, the type of crime. Similarly, lower health expenditures are relatively easy to measure, but even more important, better health is intrinsically valuable to those who are healthier. But the dollar value to healthier individuals of their improved health is far more difficult to measure. Fortunately, other researchers had already developed estimates of both the victims of crime and the value of better health. What did our analysis find? Most important, while the annual cost of the child allowance is $97 billion, the annual long-term economic benefits to society as a whole is $929 billion, or more than 9 times and close to 10 times the fiscal cost of the program. A child allowance is therefore a very good economic investment. Children's better health throughout their life is the largest single benefit, worth $420 billion. Increases in children's earnings is the next biggest benefit for children, valued at $257 billion. For taxpayers, reduced taxes as a result of the children's higher earnings when they grow up are worth $57 billion. But the largest benefit to taxpayers stems from reductions in crime. These benefits equal $326 billion. That's the second biggest benefit to society as a whole, and 2/3 of this huge benefit is attributable to reduction in victimization costs. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions in the discussion.
Thank you. So let's talk about the present moment. What are your thoughts about policies to benefit children in this particular political moment? How are we responding?
I
Jane?
think there's at least 2 different ways to answer that. So one way that I answer it in the book, and the book did come out in June, so I was really conscious of the political moment. And I mean, I had written the book to be bipartisan to start with, but it got more and more so through the final edits, because I saw which way things were going. But one way to answer it is to say, the Democrats have been in support of universal child benefits for quite some time, and the Republicans had a number of proposals to expand child benefits. So I do think there's bipartisan support, and I do think we can get there. But we are in a very particular moment where superimposed on that is, a White House that just there's no discussion, there's no debate. And there's, really the destruction of the safety net, the cuts in SNAP and food stamps, the reductions in Medicaid, the failure to expand the child tax credit. So I think we're in for very rough times at the current moment. And that's just at the federal level. I mean, normally we think about the states as being engines for innovation. Number of states introduced child tax credits subsequent to the federal expansion. That had not been an active area at the states. For a long time, New York was the only state that had a child tax credit. I think now there's 16 or more states that have a state child tax credit. So usually we think of the states as stepping in, but this is a tough, tough moment because the states are going to lose a lot of revenue, especially around Medicaid and Medicaid cuts. So the states are going to be really ill-equipped to step in and cover for the federal cuts. So I think we're in a very, sorry to say, we're in a very, very tough current moment.
So I would agree with that, but I may be a little more optimistic than you in terms of the role of states. So I think you're absolutely right that the pressure is going to be enormous on state budgets. But more states have enacted programs,
Yeah.
and I think it's worth pushing at the state level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and for us as researchers, there's now a tremendous opportunity. There's all these state expansions and even more state variation than there was before. And there's a tremendous opportunity for us to look at that state expansion and inform future federal policies. Because, all of us have worked on, cross country, and we understand the value of international evidence and evidence from other countries. But policymakers really like evidence from the United States, and they want evidence from a variety of states and a variety of settings. And that's exactly the kind of evidence base that we're going to be able to work with in the next few years. So yeah, I think there's a lot for us to do, both to encourage state policy innovation and then to study the heck out of it and make sure that we have those studies ready when the policy window opens again at the federal level, because that evidence is going to be like gold. As you were saying, Irv, we rely on the food stamp expansions, and it was an amazing natural experiment. But a lot of people then say, well, what about in the more current context? And do you have something more current? And we try to explain that if you want to study long run effects, you have to use older policy experiments if you're going to look at long run effects, which is the beauty of that work. But it'll be great to be able to complement it with more current evidence from the states. So yeah, there's a lot for us to do. But I don't know, Michael, are you more optimistic based on, Trump from out of nowhere kind of jumped in with those Trump accounts, and I'm encouraged to hear you say that there's some chance of those covering all kids, because I was sort of thinking of them as leaving out the low-income kids, but.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I basically agree with both of you. I think, the Trump accounts legislation, showed up, and so we're trying to work with it. Our real goal now is to get Treasury to find a way to enroll all the kids, and I can't predict how that will come out, but I can't be it can't be overly optimistic about it. It's a discussion. And maybe we can prevail. We're giving them policy briefs. We're giving them evidence showing that it's the most efficient thing to do. It can be done. We've done it at the state level. We're trying to give them information that would help them make a good decision. But it's hard to know how that will come out. I have to say, overall, it's not a good environment. I with this kind of political leadership and the kind of normalization of not paying any attention to people's prior hardships. That's not an environment that social workers can be very happy about or optimistic about. But I think it's going to be hard work to make this progress. I totally agree with both of you about the importance of doing our little corner of the world. We can do our research and try to do it as well as possible and have that data ready. And that's what we're trying to do also.
So you've done, like, as work outside of the United States. What have we learned from that? Where do we lag, and where are we innovating?
Well, it's interesting to work outside the country. We're hosting a conference in Kazakhstan in October. We actually one of my students' dissertation projects ended up leaving Kazakhstan to think about a kids account. Then, and in 2024, they opened an account for all their kids. This example is interesting because it's an oil and gas resource economy. They have some other minerals, but largely oil and gas. And they have a sovereign fund based on that wealth. And they're going to spend 50% of the earnings on their sovereign fund every year to fund kids accounts. And this kind of thing, you say, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But they have done this now 2 years in a row, and they seem quite committed to it. So that project's interesting because there are 83 low middle income countries that depend heavily on natural resource wealth. And if fossil fuels are in transition out, and they are, then all those economies are going to have to build a different economy. And that's the reason Kazakhstan began to fund kids accounts, because they knew that they were going to have to educate their children to build a new economy. That's a kind of enlightenment that doesn't show up all the time in the world. So we're hosting this conference, and China has now become very interested. So China's going to be in Astana for that conference. Several pretty senior Chinese policy officials. So possibly, and China is starting. I don't know if this news has reached the United States very well, but China is going to start a universal child benefit, which is remarkable. It's hard to get your head around these numbers. They have 300 million young people at age 18 or younger. So, and China is interested in, perhaps, we hope, attaching also a savings component, asset building component to the child benefit. And that's a strategy that we used in Israel. All the Israeli citizen kids have a child benefit and now have a child development account. And we were also able to get some of the stateless Palestinians in East Jerusalem into that policy structure. So I was really proud of that work. Now, of course, things in that part of the world are a complete mess, but we remain hopeful about that project. We're in a pretty good discussion with Jordan now about a child development account. So we're thinking, and this is sort of larger picture, but maybe we can move to a larger picture. We starting to think about social policy, not just as within nations, but maybe, some cooperation across nations, which probably will be a long-term trend. You would think so. And maybe a way to introduce or weave some positive patterns in parts of the world where there is a lot of conflict. Maybe people in the Middle East can agree about developing all of the children. And if that kind of thinking can begin, if social policy can start to be used perhaps as not just a social welfare tool, but maybe also a geopolitical tool of how people are getting along together, maybe that it might be possible sometime. I mean, this is a long process, of course, but we have there are younger people coming along. we're not, us old guys are not going to be doing that work, but maybe there's some hope for that kind of future.
So I love your optimism.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say on the question of, what can we learn internationally, again, coming back to the example of child benefits, 2/3 of the countries in the world have some kind of child benefit. All of our wealthy peers, all of the OECD countries except for us have child benefits. And these programs, they've been around for 100 years or more, and they're not static. So politicians love to do stuff on behalf of children and families. So politicians get elected, and then unexpectedly, they raise the benefits, or they give you more benefits if you have more, a higher number of kids, or they reduce benefits, or they throw in a birth grant, or they throw in higher benefits for young children when they get interested in, preschool age children. So those natural experiments, as Irv was saying, those are whole populations. Those, talk about, forget large nationally representative samples. Those are whole populations where you're able to just study what's happened to children and families. And so those are really impressive and really robust data points. So those allow us to see when certain types of families get more money, how do they spend the money? Do they start having more kids? Do they cut back on employment? Is their material hardship lessened? Is their mental health better? Is the kids' health better? Are the kids doing better in reading and math? Those are really robust data points, and multiple data points. If you figure there's 38 countries times multiple experiments. So it's really useful. There's been a number of questions in the chat about sort of small scale social programs in the United States that do their best to recruit low income families and then have a sample of families that agreed to be in a study. And then over a very limited period of time, experimentally give one group some benefits and don't give another group the benefits. The most recent of those was Baby's First Years, an incredibly well-designed experiment, well implemented. They reached families got the money, they spent the money. But unfortunately, it occurred during COVID. I mean, there was nobody could control that, but it did occur during COVID. So we all know what chaos occurred during COVID. And the other thing that occurred during COVID, besides all the chaos and disruption and stress, which affected both the treatment and the control group, was that there were these massive transfers to families. There was the expansion in the child tax credit that we've been talking about. There were the stimulus checks, which many people received. There was the eviction moratorium. There were the expansions in unemployment insurance. Thank God. I mean, we really dug in as a country and transferred a lot of benefits to low-income families. I think it's quite plausible. Those benefits went to both the treatment and the control group in programs like Baby's First Years. I think it's quite plausible that those benefits swamped any effect that we would have seen of the Baby's First Years payments, which, were modest, and they were not per child, they were per family. So there's been quite a lot of talk in the chat about, there's been a couple of studies recently where we didn't find, sizable effects on kids' health or development, and should we be concerned about that? If you look at something like Baby's First Years, they didn't even find an effect on material hardship. So this is a program that provided income to families, but didn't reduce material hardship. Well, that tells you that sort of the first stage of that program didn't happen. There wasn't a first stage effect. So if the theory of change is you increase families' income, you reduce hardship, and then kids will do better. Well, if you don't reduce hardship, then of course the kids aren't going to do better. And it's not, there are plausible reasons why it didn't reduce hardship, because a larger tidal wave of assistance was distributed to both sets of families in the form of the stimulus checks, the child tax credits, the unemployment insurance payments, and all the other stuff that went out, thank God.
Yeah.
So it's one study. I know it's one study that's gotten a lot of attention, and, it's a fabulous team of investigators. It was really well done. I really want to emphasize that. But it hit during COVID. So it's a data point, and there's like 1,000 other data points, which I review in the book. So, there's one data point here, and there's about 1,000 over here. So
I want to build on that because I agree with everything you said. And I just want to, people say that random assignment experiments are the gold standard. That's absurd on its face. Maybe it's the gold standard for internal validity.
Right, yeah.
It's clearly not this gold standard for external validity for all the reasons Jane just said. The environment, who believes that the effects of that experiment would have been the same in a environment where there was no COVID, where there was not all these benefits that swamped the baby first benefits. And so we need to get rid of in our minds that random assignment experiments are the gold standard. Maybe they're the gold standard for internal validity. They are nowhere near the gold standard for external validity. In fact, what it's not even the silver standard. It's not even the pewter standard. Uh, it just, they don't measure up for external validity. And that's true of any social science experiment.
So what do we know about so-called third world countries? Is anything that we might know about what's happening in terms of how they are addressing the needs of children?
Well, some of them have adopted child benefits.
Okay.
I think in a lot of the low and middle income countries, there's been a lot of experimentation with what are called conditional cash transfers, more so than in the more advanced countries, the wealthier countries. So conditional cash transfers, especially, for example, in South America, very widespread, would be the idea that you get a benefit for your child so long as you send the child to school, or so long as you bring your child to the clinic for required appointments. And there's an idea that in a low cost setting, it's costly to do those things. There's actually a tangible financial cost to take your child to the clinic or the doctor. You may have to pay for transportation. You may have to take time off work. Even sending your child to school, if you're in a rural area, could mean taking your child out of home production or out of agricultural work. So it's meant to sort of give families, an economic incentive to send their kids to school. I think over time they've started shifting to a more unconditional model of benefits, but that's been a point of contrast between the lower and the higher income countries. But yeah, I did a scan in the book. I did a scan, across every country, and at that point, 2/3 of the countries in the world had some kind of child benefit, and that didn't count China, which is brand new. So I think countries are moving towards that, and sometimes the benefits are provided not, to children, they're provided more to households is another distinction.
Okay. So since we have Irv here, I wanted to ask you, we haven't heard much about child support recently, and I know you were very involved in developing that policy. Why we don't hear more about it? Do we have it right?
No, we're not close to having it right, either on the collection side, but more important, well, I don't, so I pursued child support personally because we were in a very conservative environment, and child support enforcement appeals to conservatives. At the same time, I was interested in a guarantee of the child support and what I called an assured benefit. And we didn't get much traction, political traction. In the end, conservatives opposed that. There's still quite a bit of research going on child support enforcement and on the importance of an assured benefit. The research shows that for low income fathers, that's the overwhelming majority of absent parents, that their incomes are low and irregular. So even under the best child support enforcement system, your benefits are going to be low and irregular for low income mothers. And that's where an assured benefit comes in. Also, I realized that because we didn't have a child benefit, I aimed for too high of an assured child support benefit because I was trying to compensate for the lack of a child allowance. And child support is, it applies to close to half of children are going to be eligible for child support at some time during their lifetime, but that's still only half. And the other half of children also need support. So that brought me to switch to focus on a child allowance rather than child support in my own personal research. And I had done some some research on universal basic income, which is just the child allowance plus an adult allowance. So it was natural for me to shift my emphasis in my own personal research to child allowances. Does that answer your question, Charles?
Yeah, so I would like to go back to talk a little bit more about the states because Michael, you've had much success in the states, and so from the big picture, right? That there's from the national perspective, it's not going to offer. I mean, it offers resources and guidance, but the actual implementation happens usually at the state level. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, we have worked at the state level because we we needed a we needed a policy platform to work with. And creating a whole new, especially if you're at the experimental level, creating a whole new policy platform is not that easy to do. And we wanted to demonstrate something that, if put in place and the evidence is good, that it could then become a policy. But we weren't. It's that might sound like a fine distinction, but it's really not. You don't want to test something in a form that it can't be scaled. So we looked a lot at that stage. That's quite a long time ago. We looked a lot at the federal thrift savings plan as a possible policy platform. We decided for various reasons not to use it, and we used the state 529 college savings plans. So we ended up working at the states because there was an available policy platform that we could scale, that we could use. We didn't have to go find the asset manager. We didn't have to go find, the whole structure for operating it. We just had to make some adjustments in it. So we got, as I said, the state of Oklahoma to use their 529 platform and open accounts for every kid, or two samples, 2 periods when we sampled all the kids during those periods got an account. They became treatment kids, and randomly we have control kids that we follow with them. Now we're in a discussion at the federal level where I think they have to go figure out a savings plan structure, but the people who are in the current Treasury Department are not what, how can I say this? They're not quite as focused on structure as they should be. So they're talking about, well, maybe there can be, any number of different asset managers that handle these accounts. They're very interested in the idea that individuals have a relationship with this, with this investing system and learn about the stock market and all of these kinds of things. And that's actually possible in a savings plan structure, but they're not there. So I don't know the answer to this question, Charles. There's gonna, in my view, if this is going to be a successful Trump accounts policy, they're going to have to adapt the thrift savings plan or recreate something like it. And right now, it's not clear they're ready to do that. So.
Yeah, in fact, it's time limited. This policies, it's going to end in a couple of years.
Yeah. So we know from international experience. For example, in the UK, we had we worked with the Blair government to create the Child Trust Fund. This is quite some time ago. The Child Trust Fund had accounts for 7 cohorts of kids. Then there was a governmental change, and that policy was put on hold. But they had approved the asset managers, but they had 70 some of them, a number that was way too large, and the fee structure was high, so that these financial institutions were charging high fees, so assets didn't accumulate that much over time, and so on. So the right policy idea is that there's a savings plan, and the government then can use that as leverage, because an asset manager does like to manage large amounts of assets. You can use that as leverage to get the fees down, work on a contract that makes this a desirable policy. And you could even work on contract features that do a little more for poor people. And you could, you have some ability to shape a policy. If you just turn this loose to individuals in the market, like everybody has an IRA in the market, then people will, it won't be successful. Think about all the kids who have just a small amount in their accounts. What asset manager wants to manage a bunch of very small accounts? None. So then they're not. So far, the policy design folks in Treasury are not grappling with that the way they should. But we're trying to work with it. We're hoping they'll be able to see.
Okay, you raise an interesting point, because over the last 50 years or so, beginning with Reagan, we've seen a huge transfer of resources from the government to private sector. We got more billionaires. Is there any way to leverage that in terms of them investing in I imagine there's some of that going on, but that doesn't work on a policy level.
There's some of it going on, and the partnership that we have, we do a lot of work with Robinhood in New York City as an example. They spend $100 million a year fighting poverty in New York City, but they've also determined that alone they cannot eliminate poverty in New York City. Even 100 million a year is not going to do it. They have to work in concert with government, and government's got to do its share. So there's no way that the private sector is going to be able to fill in for government if government keeps stepping away. So, you'd asked earlier about the current political moment, and, I think we want to be sure to say that, we all have some influence over the current political moment, and it's really important for people in different parts of the country to be in touch with their legislators, federal and state, to speak up about the Medicaid cuts, the food stamp cuts, the failure to expand the child tax credit, childcare costs. And anytime I talk to a legislator, they know about childcare costs because they hear from their constituents about that. Legislators are very supportive about expanding paid leave because they've heard from their constituents about that. So it's really important to be in touch with them, Democrats, Republicans, whoever your representative is. It's just really important to reach out and not be apathetic about this because they're hearing from other folks. So they need to hear, from all of us, and they need to hear consistently. And they'll, at some point they'll take action. They're a little bit hamstrung at the moment. There's only one person who seems to have any influence in Congress at the moment. But that's not permanent. And it is really important to be reaching out. And just as we reach out with the evidence, there's other forms of evidence. There's qualitative evidence, there's people's direct experience, and all of that is super important and powerful. I think some of the, the most compelling studies that I reviewed for the book were qualitative, interviewing families about how they spent the money when they got these checks and what it meant to their family. One family's direct report of how they spent the money is worth, 10 quantitative studies. And that's as a quantitative researcher, I can own that. So, personal narrative is really important. And numbers are important. Numbers are personal narratives. So everybody's got a part to play in this.
So, putting on your optimist hat, what is the most promising direction for child benefit policy?
Well, I wanted to ask Irv a question that was in the chat, and without putting you on the spot, Irv, where would you put your money? Because you've done cost benefit analyses of a number of different policies. And I know we're definitely not in the place where like there's one policy that's like the be all and end all. It's like and. Like it's parental leave and it's childcare and it's child benefits and it's child development accounts and it's preschool and it's improved education. I mean, it's health insurance. But you've done cost benefit analyses of different programs. And so when you say that child benefits return like 9 to 1 or 10 to 1 for every dollar spent,
Yes.
like how do you situate that? Is that like high or is that like a normal fight? Are all programs delivering 10 to 1 or?
So
Can you just like put it in context?
I can contrast it and compare it to paid leave. I don't feel comfortable about child care
Yeah.
because we, in our benefit cost analysis, had to abstract from the quality of care
Oh, okay. Yeah.
the child got. And so, but this I can tell you about paid leave. The ratio is even higher for paid leave. The benefits that relative to the fiscal cost is even higher. And the biggest single benefit, which at first I thought couldn't be, it was so big, it was mother's health. And
Oh, it
then
is big. Yeah, it is big.
mother's health.
It's big
And
because it's long run benefit for mother's health.
Yeah, long run benefit for
Yeah.
mother's health is
Yeah.
gigantic. And I realized that isn't crazy because think of the proportion of mothers who have postpartum depression. It's like a fifth of
Yeah.
all mothers have depression after birth.
Yeah.
So if you can cut that even.
Yeah, and depression is toxic for kids' development. It also is
Right.
disruptive to the marriage and that relationship. So
Oh.
marriages disrupt. So that's interesting because paid leave is an area where I would be optimistic. I mean, those laws are diffusing through the states,
But here,
and
yeah,
Congress was very close to a bipartisan agreement on paid family leave before Trump was elected. And I think the presumption would be once he's out of the way, that would move forward. I
so
think likewise, childcare. So no, I'm optimistic about a lot of things.
I'd like to make one other
Oh,
point
sorry.
about, so paid leave is the total benefits that come from paid leave compared to that come from a child allowance is small, because the number of people that are affected by paid leave in any given year
Yeah, it's
is
small.
small compared to the number of people that get a child allowance. So the ratio is higher, but the expenditure on a child allowance is, I'm making this up, but it's close to, my guess, tenfold.
Yeah,
It's somewhere in that range. So even though the ratio is much lower, the total economic benefits that are generated and non-economic benefits, the poverty reduction rate that you get from a child allowance, as you mentioned, we we would put us up there with a Scandinavian country,
yeah,
uh, and that's really important, I think. So, both, I wouldn't say either or, but politically, I agree with you. We're probably closer to a paid leave program,
and child benefit. Yeah.
and it's
Although,
cheaper to
as
do at the state level.
yeah, although as one of the commenters pointed out, there is concern in the United States suddenly about fertility. And that is actually part of the motivation on the part of the Republican side to increase child benefits, is to increase the ability of families to have the number of children that they would like to have. So that is actually something that's animating the support for child benefits. And I think that possibly it's a confused gesture, but it's possibly why Trump introduced these Trump accounts, thinking that they were like a child benefit or some kind of birth grant. I don't know if there's actually evidence about the fertility effect of these child savings accounts. It seems unlikely to me because these are not, I was talking about birth grants where somebody gets a check like right away, like you give birth and you get $5,000. Child savings account, you give birth and your child, when they're 18, gets some money to help them get started, go to college, buy a house, start a business. I don't know that that's affecting fertility.
It's
Have-
there's a little evidence from Singapore, and
Okay.
and probably not. It's a lot like your evidence of fertility in your book. It's just there are some signs maybe, but
It's patchy, yeah.
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 But a lot of countries believe in that anyway. Like the Chinese now have a rapidly declining birth rate, as you know, and they're very concerned about it. So a major reason that they're doing they're going to do the child benefit and they're interested in a child development account is because of their birth rate.
Yeah.
My guess, based on the evidence from other countries, is that's probably not going to have that big an effect. But
No, I mean, when I looked at it in the book, what seemed to have an effect was more tangible services for the children. So these immediate birth grants had an effect, and then childcare, subsidizing childcare seemed to have a big effect. If you knew that there was going to be childcare available for your child, that seemed to have an effect on fertility. Because for parents, that is a big cost. I mean, not everybody uses paid childcare, but a lot of people use it at least some of the time, and it is really expensive. So yeah,
Okay, so we're kind of winding down here. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, the Center for Social Development. We collaborated on this event, and they did all the work, thankfully. But no, I appreciate Chris, Tanika, and Lisa for the outstanding job they did in helping to put this together. We thank the National Association of Social Workers, the Society for Social Work and Research, the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, the Grand Challenges for social work, and of course, Vakalahi and the Council on Social Work Education. This has been a pretty interesting conversation for me. Uh, I think I will go back and look at it again, and it will be available um, to uh, to view. Chris will have to get the word out on how others can see this. So I just want to thank my colleagues and our panelists, Dr. Jane Waldfogel, Irwin Garfinkel, and Michael Sherraden for doing this, taking the time to do this. No, so I want to I want to close by giving each of you an opportunity to make a closing statement. But with one thing in mind, what advice would you give to the next generation of social work scholars who want to influence child poverty, probably child benefit policy? Should I tell them to come see you?
Well, I'll just, I don't have an answer to your question. I do have a an outlook that I think that the policy structures that we're working with are largely from an industrial era, and I think they were designed to fit that kind of economy and society. And uh, I think it looks like we're going to be moving pretty quickly, even more rapidly out of an industrial era into more of an information age, or maybe an intelligence age. It's not at all clear what labor markets are going to look like in that world. I think we're all have to be uneasy about what those possibilities might be if they're negative. Could be a utopia, but maybe not. And so I think there's a lot of social policy that our younger colleagues are going to have to work on figuring out, like what kind of social policies fit the kind of economy and society that we're moving into. And my guess is by the end of this century, that'll look pretty different.
So it's too bad we're ending because I couldn't disagree more with you in in the following sense that I think back to 100, 200, 300 years ago, and I think about the development of social policy over time. And I think a lot of the social policies that we've adapted in the last 100 years has served us very well and would have served earlier generations. So we began with the poor law in all the rich capitalist countries. As they developed capitalism, they developed the poor law. But it's been well over 100 years, several 100 years, that we've known about the limitations of the poor law, and we developed social insurance. We developed public education and other public services. And I think those institutions have served us well. And so I would say to the next generation, look to history and learn from it. I'm not worried about the big changes that are likely to take place. I agree with you that the labor market may change dramatically, but it may not. We don't know for sure. What we do know as researchers is that the opportunities to do research for the next generation are enormous because the data infrastructures that have been created are remarkable. In my own lifetime, and even in the last 10, 20 years, the quality of research, because of the quality of the data, has just improved dramatically. All the natural experiments that I relied on were at the time we studied, it was in the last decade. Now it's in the last decade and a half. That's a remarkable statement. So,
Yes.
Well, I'll quote you, Irv. I like your optimism.
So I want to be sure to say thank you to Charles for convening us. This has really been fabulous. And I want to be sure also to thank our Center on Poverty and Social Policy at Columbia School of Social Work, which has done so much of the research that I cite in the book was done by our center. So Chris Weimer, Megan Curran, Sophie Collier, David Harris, there's like 30 more people, the Center on Poverty and Social Policy crew are just turning out really, really important evidence on all of these topics. So I couldn't have done the book without it. So yeah, I think it's not an accident that we're at schools of social work and that the center's at a school of social work. I think social work has so much to bring to this conversation. And so I would say, the question was, what do you say to students and future researchers? I would say, do what you love, do what you're interested in, do what you're good at. If you're like a nerdy quantitative person, like, Irv and me and Michael, then do quantitative stuff. If you're a qualitative researcher, go for it, because that stuff is like gold. If you're more sort of politically oriented or interested in how issues are framed, oh my God, do we need that? Do we need help framing issues and getting away from these old narratives about welfare and the deserving poor and the undeserving poor? Like, this should not be the conversation. We really need to get out of it. If you're a local activist or you're all about advocacy, oh my God, do we need you? Whoever you are, we need your grounding in the real experiences of children and families and real people, because that's what's powerful, is having that grounding and being able to speak about real people and being able to speak as a real person. So yeah, the important thing is to engage in these issues and, not give up, but there's no, magic recipe or single way to do it. We need all of these different approaches. It could be local, it could be at the state level, it could be national, it could be international, but you have to do something. We all have to do something, because the status quo is like not okay. It is really not okay. And so I was one of those who said, it's going to be fine, we'll just wait it out. That is not the right answer, because it's not fine. And a lot of things are happening and we can't just wait it out. So we really need to each of us be doing what we can. And all of us are happy to have partners. So, reach out to us. Michael's in a million states and localities and countries. He loves to collaborate. Irv and I do too. Charles does as well. I mean, Charles, you're leading the good fight in Congress. So people reach out to Charles and volunteer to help him out, because he's bringing the voice of social work to Congress. So reach out to Charles and ask him what you can do. But we need all of you.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Tanika, can we show that book again before we close?
Oh, yeah, and buy the book. Oh, of course. Yeah. That's what all of you should do.
And okay. Child benefits, smart investment for America's future. And look in the chat or scan the QR code and get a 25% discount. And so I want to thank you all guys for a wonderful event and a discussion. And we look forward to having more of these.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
And thank you all for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at other events. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.